Hi, my name is Dr. Devaruti Haldar, and in this video session, I'm going to discuss about the challenging cyberspace and significance of laws in dealing with it. First of all, we have to understand about the conceptualization of cyberspace. Lawrence Lessig, one of the pioneer professors dealing with cyber law, has already indicated that cyberspace can be conceptualized from the aspect of possibility of actions on the cyberspace. He also indicated that there is livability in the cyberspace. That means, as we can see from the present modern time, if a person creates any profile, if a person leaves any digital footprint on cyberspace, it may live forever. A person can be a virtual personality also. A person can have his entire business. Cyberspace can also help in e-learning, e-commerce, etc. Saying that, he also indicated that cyberspace also has to go ahead with time organization and spatial organization. Lawrence Lessig also indicated about four pillars of cyberspace. That is, there should be law, there should be norms, that is the policies, the behaviors on the cyberspace, etc. There should be a market, that means the content that are being created on the cyberspace, the ideas that are being generated on the cyberspace, etc. And that should be sold, that should be bought, that should be consumed on the cyberspace, and it actually also makes an understanding about e-commerce perspective also. And finally, there should be constraint on the cyberspace, which basically indicates about limitations on the cyberspace. He argued that cyberspace is regulable. Now, we must also accept the fact that there are several researchers, there are several persons, stakeholders who came up with an understanding that cyberspace is not regulable. But he predicted, he indicated, and he also suggested that cyberspace is regulable. If we see the development of cyberspace or internet, we can see that cyberspace and also internet had basically developed from the understanding of military intelligence, as well as now it has come down to the understanding of a platform for free flow of information, which means that internet and cyberspace basically holds a wide potential for being a platform for infotainment, for being a platform for securing certain very vital information, and also this cyberspace is very vulnerable. That means anybody can attack that particular infrastructure and can access the information, can access vital informations if the infrastructure is not that strong. Now we would see about the use of cyberspace. There are basically four main uses of cyberspace. Number one is that information sharing. Why do we use the cyberspace? This is basically for knowledge sharing or information sharing. Each and every update, each and every publishing, etc., might come up with certain kinds of information sharing. This information can be positive information. This information can be negative information also. The second thing is that cyberspace may be used for commercial purposes. E-commerce perspective you say, or for example, generating certain information for profit gain you can say. All these things may indicate that cyberspace may be used for commercial purposes. Next, we do get to see about policy making and development. With the growth of cyberspace, with the growth of internet, there is a lot of change that we have basically come across, we have basically seen, either you say in the privacy domain or you say about the speech right domain, etc. So it has also raised many debates, it has also raised many issues, etc. for policy making, development, etc. And to a certain extent, it has gone with a positive result. Last but not the least, the use of internet or cyberspace may be done for socializing with people. Now, how the socializing may happen? We do get to see many unknown persons on the cyberspace. We do meet many unknown persons on the cyberspace. We exchange knowledge, we exchange our data, we socialize. Also, while I say cyberspace can be used for socializing, we must also understand that this socializing may also extend the scope of physical space socializing. That means virtually also people are connected, and if physical socializing with the known people are not happening, virtual socializing may also happen thanks to internet. Now, what are the reasons, what are the challenges, and why do we have to fear about such challenges? The main issue here is the rise of global security concerns. As I just mentioned, that there are several vulnerable informations that are being exchanged almost on every second on the internet. There are also monetary information, personal data, etc., that are being exchanged, that are being secured, that are being saved, etc., on the web platforms, on the cyberspace, on the internet. So there is also a rise of global security problem. Now, these people who are up for infringing the privacy, who are up for infringing the security infrastructure, etc., may do it either for terrorism purposes or for unethical gain purposes. But we have understood that there is a steep rise of global security concerns. Now, we will identify the main challenges. As we may get to see in this slide, number one challenge here is obviously jurisdiction. We are going to discuss it later. The next is privacy. What is private for one person may not be private for another person. Similarly, if a person does not know how to be private on the cyberspace, he might reveal so many data. He might reveal so many data ignorantly. He might also reveal so many data knowing that that particular data is going to harm, or that particular exposure of data is going to harm not only him but also his associates. Further, privacy also indicates bodily privacy that may be exposed through internet for unethical gain. Privacy also indicates confidential documents, infringing of the confidential documents that might carry very vital information about the governance, etc. Next is free speech related challenges. So there is always a debate on free speech versus unprotected speech. Just like privacy, there is also a huge confusion about what is free speech, what is not a free speech, whether a particular speech uploaded or posted from one particular jurisdiction may be considered as an illegal speech in another jurisdiction, whether that particular speech is going to harm other person who is getting to see to it, whether that particular speech basically attacks or infringes the privacy of another person, etc. These are all the challenges that we do get to see on internet. Obviously, we cannot ignore the fact that cyber terrorism is also steeply growing. And this is considered as one of the main challenges that we have to face, and this will stay with us forever. Obviously, when we also discuss about the challenges, we cannot ignore the abuse of women and child on the cyberspace, be it on the privacy aspect, be it with unprotected speech, with illegal speech, with indecent speech, etc. And obviously, we have, last but not the least, economic offenses. Again, as we do get to see that ethical or unethical gain on the internet as a mechanism for commercial activities may or may not be positive for others. For example, if a person uploads some contents, for example, if it is a revenge porn material, or for example, if it is a voyeur porn material, or for example, if it is a deep fake porn material, etc., he might gain some kind of unethical profit out of that uploading. But this kinds of unethical gain may be extremely detrimental for the victim, or these kinds of unethical gain may also go ahead for creating lots of legal issues. For example, black money can be generated, etc. We are going to now discuss about the conflict of laws for jurisdiction on cyberspace. Sorry. This kinds of conflicts of laws might come when the questions like this come up, that is, where the offense was committed. Suppose, for example, the offense was committed in USA where the effect was felt. So this is basically known as effect test that we would be having discussion about, and also you can see my other videos where I have discussed about jurisdiction at large, but we do get to see the effect may be felt in some other country and not necessarily in the jurisdiction where the offense was already committed. And the third question is that offender belongs to which country? Suppose, for example, a person sitting in the US has committed an offense. That effect of that particular offense has been felt in India, but the offender actually belongs to any other country, for example, South Africa or Russia or Japan, etc. So here you do get to see a triangle. That means the offender belonging to Russia, sitting in USA, and his offense is basically being felt, the effect of the same offense is being felt in India. So this is one of the main challenges that we do get to see when we discuss about the jurisdiction on the cyberspace, or the problems of jurisdiction on the cyberspace. The main issues related to conflict of laws for jurisdiction on cyberspace may include questions such as: which country can adjudicate? Are offences committed online are extraditable? How to enforce the orders? What happens when the offences are committed by individual persons targeting another person, or targeting a state or corporate house? What happens in cases of website liability? Which state can exercise jurisdiction in such cases? Questions regarding treaties, procedure prescribed as per the domestic procedural laws. Now we will discuss about the issues related to privacy. First, we will discuss about the types of subject matters that may attract the issues related to privacy. For example, there are several issues related to sensitive personal data. This depends upon where the sensitive personal data is being uploaded, where the sensitive personal data is being secured, who is accessing the sensitive personal data, how it is being secured, how it is being leaked, etc. Next is information privacy. As I just mentioned, internet and also cyberspace provides a wide platform for exchanging information. But there are certain information that are supposed to be confidential information. In this, we have to see how far the confidentiality of the information is being secured, how far the information privacy is being secured, whether that particular information is private or whether that particular information need not be private at all. These are also posing several challenges. Next is data privacy. There is a huge overlap between the concept of information and data. Basically, information and data, they may include each other when we go ahead for conceptualizing. But data privacy also includes certain kinds of privacy aspects. For example, if a body corporate collects some data, if a body corporate collects some information, how they are providing the privacy to the data, how they are providing the privacy and security to the data owner, etc. All these issues may also come up and pose as a challenging issue. Next is physical privacy. Obviously, when we do get to see that there are certain issues related to sensitive personal data, information privacy, data privacy, and they are being infringed or they are almost going to be infringed, then comes the question of physical privacy, or then comes the question of threat to physical privacy. For example, if we take the concept of stalking, if some person has hacked into some information, hacked into some data, etc., that particular person might come to know where the data owner, where the information giver's residence is, from where he is operating, where he is going, etc. So in that case, he might start monitoring, he might start stalking that particular person, and one day you may get to see that the data owner or the actual person who had been uploading the information, etc., but he tried to keep that information as confidential and private, which has been unfortunately infringed. That particular person has been physically harmed by the hacker, by the stalker, etc. And obviously digital privacy. Most of the times we do get to see information, data, digital information or digital privacy are all connected with each other. So this also indicates the security of the device, the security of the platform, the security of the chain of the devices, etc. So altogether, we can see that these kinds of subject matters also pose and also create challenges on the cyberspace, especially for lawmakers and also executors of law. Now comes the question as who may disturb our privacy. We may not know who the person is or who may be the person who may disturb our privacy. But from our personal connections, from the day-to-day behavior of persons, we may somehow predict or we may somehow come to know that who may disturb our privacy. But again, this again creates or poses a challenge to the privacy related laws on the cyberspace, because anonymity cloak may be used by any harasser, any perpetrator. As such, we do understand that government by way of surveillance may infringe our privacy. And in such cases, there are lots of debates, especially from countries like US or UK or even from India also, whereby it has understood or it has been debated that surveillance by the government, especially during the elections, or for example, for some other kind of pandemic situation, etc., that is really disturbing and that may infringe our privacy. Obviously, privacy may also be disturbed, may also be infringed by private stakeholders. And this is something which is graver than the surveillance of the government. What happens here? Our data, our information, etc., may be hacked, may be misused, etc., putting us in legal trouble, putting us in financial loss, etc. I will now discuss about the types of offences related to privacy violation on the cyberspace and also on the internet. Sorry. So the first type of offence that comes in our mind when we are talking about the offences related to privacy violation is cyber stalking. Cyber stalking is not cyberbullying. Cyber stalking is neither pornography. This is something whereby we do get to see a type of monitoring, a type of persuading the person to have contact with the perpetrator, and if the victim does not allow that, does not wish that, then the stalker may become aggressive and then the stalker may start creating some more sorts of criminal activities. For example, because of this kind of frustration that he may not be able to follow, he may not be able to persuade the victim to have constant connection with him, he might go ahead for hacking, he might go ahead for defaming, he might go ahead for creating threat messages, etc., to the victim. Next is, as I just mentioned in the cyber stalking, is the concept of hacking. Now, please do understand that in our Indian laws, not only in our Indian laws, many jurisdictions basically do not use the term hacking when they are drafting laws, especially for privacy protection or even for internet privacy protection. So the term is basically known as unauthorized access. Unauthorized access can happen to the data, to the device, to the networking like sites, etc. So unauthorized modification of the data, that is the data that has been hacked, that has been accessed by the hacker, etc., that can also happen, and that can also create some kinds of offensive behavior, offensive contents, etc. These are also the types of offenses that are related to the privacy violation. Other than that, we have also seen there are several other kinds of privacy violation. For example, by way of phishing. Now, this phishing happens when the mail or the messages are sent to random persons or to chosen persons, and some vital information, including sensitive personal data, are used by duping the person, by making him understand that these are necessary for maintaining the balance in the banks, or for example maintaining the bank account, or for example for activating certain other services from the banks, etc. So this phishing can also include questions such as the birth date, or for example the PAN number, or for example the the account number, etc. Job scams are also a kind of privacy violation, because in such cases, even though it would be used from an impersonated profile or from a cloned profile, we do get to see that the person will be duped by asking for transferring of some money. In these cases, you do get to see that privacy would be violated, especially when the person will be asking for exposing the bank details, etc. Even in certain cases, the ATM PIN number details, etc., might also be asked. Not only that, these kinds of job scams might also indicate to expose the physical identity, or for example identity related documents, etc., or for example residential information, etc. Similarly, we do get to see lottery scams are also there, which may be treated as offences related to the privacy violation. Next, we do get to see infringement of private sensitive data, and this private sensitive data might also be infringed, as I just mentioned, by way of phishing, job scams, lottery scams. Not only by that, Suppose, for example, some platform or body corporate are basically storing some information, and these are sensitive personal data. These are necessary for generating identity, especially for the job place, that is workplace, or for example, when a person has gone for some treatment, etc. All the information, data, etc. that are generated, that may be considered as sensitive personal data. So even that can also be infringed, especially when there are some kind of ransomware, or there are some kinds of, like, hacking of the body corporates, platforms, etc. The next type of offenses that we do get to see, which is related to privacy violation, are doxing, that is data mining, and then using that data for further defamation. Revenge porn, that means using some photograph, or for example some kind of other information, etc., for taking revenge on the victim, etc. We also do get to see about sextortion. That means the victim would be asked to share certain nude selfies, or for example certain photographs where the victim is shown in not so proper clothing, etc., and that photographs would be taken, and then the victim would be told that these kinds of photographs would be uploaded on the internet, provided the victim pays the perpetrator a huge sum or a huge amount of money. This is basically sextortion. And obviously, in all such cases, we do get to see that physical privacy, information privacy, data privacy, everything is basically infringed. Sorry. Obviously, with this, we do also get to see about child porn, using of the children for creating pornographic purposes or pornographic contents, or for example, showing the child some kinds of pornographic, contents, etc. All these things are basically penalized. These are considered as criminal offenses, but child porn also infringes the privacy, data privacy, information privacy of the child. Next, last but not the least, we do get to see there is also infringement of privacy that may happen for corporate data. Corporate data, including some vital information about that particular company, or for example, papers related to agreement, papers related to commercial agreements, etc., that might be unauthorizedly accessed. The names of the company may be misused in all such cases for accessing other innocent victims, especially when it is a job scam, etc. Or for example, the company's entire digital privacy may be infringed to leak certain vital data, which would be bringing down the company's reputation in the market. Obviously, it also includes ransomware attacks also. The question is, do we have legal rights to protect our privacy? The answer is yes. But, however, several laws are yet to be developed. As such, the concept of physical privacy flows from the UN Convention of Human Rights, that is, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Next, in India, we do have concept of privacy rights from Article 21 of the Constitution of India, even though we do not have any focused provision protecting the privacy of physical privacy or data privacy, etc. But still then, Article 21 has been broadened to include privacy rights as our fundamental right. We do have laws coming from Indian Penal Code, which also extends their scope to protect our privacy. Obviously, we have provisions from Information Technology Act, especially in Chapter 9 and Chapter 11, which speak about certain sections which provide some kinds of protection to our privacy, information privacy, data privacy, digital privacy, etc. For the children, privacy is of utmost importance. So we do have certain domestic laws in this regard. Number one is Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Amendment Act 2015, which not only provides provisions relating to confidentiality and privacy of children in need of care and protection, but also children in conflict with law. We also have Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, which also provides privacy towards the data and also information and also physical privacy of the children. However, in India, Data Protection Bill has been proposed, but till today, we have not yet got to see that the Data Protection Bill has become a law. It is still in the bill format. From the international perspective, we do get to see European Union General Data Protection Regulations, which provides a very strong legal rules or very strong understanding about the data protection, especially for consensual data, processing of the data, etc. We also have several domestic data protection related laws in different countries. For example, UK may have its own data protection laws, Canada may have its own data protection laws, but however, we still do not have any uniform treaty as such, which have included Indian aspect also for data protection. Rather, I would present it in this fashion. India has not yet entered into any treaty whereby the uniform data protection system has been accepted, ratified in our country. Above all, Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the US provides the rights against unreasonable search, seizure, etc. And that has been considered as the guiding principle for creating privacy-related policies, especially for several websites, web companies, etc. While we are discussing about the privacy-related offences, we must also discuss about the tilting responsibility for protecting the individual's digital privacy. Obviously, the government is the prime stakeholder. How the government may ensure digital privacy or protection of privacy, physical privacy, data privacy, etc. The government can do so by ensuring that sensitive and confidential data is protected in the database by creating laws, executing the laws properly. The second stakeholder that we do get to see who may be responsible or may be held responsible, especially when the privacy has been infringed, is the websites and web companies with whom we share our data. Most of the times we do get to see that the websites will not take the responsibility and will try to escape from the clutches of the law, especially when they have already made the users aware about the privacy protection mechanism that they are offering. So they would be shifting the burden on the individual, stating that we have already made you aware about our privacy protection mechanism, you have not used it. And by this, we do get to see that the websites often come out of the clutches of law, especially when it comes to the responsibility for protecting the individual's digital privacy. Now, we would also see and understand what is the guiding principle for protecting the privacy on the cyberspace. As I mentioned earlier, Fourth Amendment of the US Constitution has been held as one of the prime guiding law for creating any sort of policy guidelines, etc., for providing privacy to the users, to the web companies, etc., and also for creating some other kinds of rules, etc., related to privacy protection. Fourth Amendment therefore says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by the oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. As you may understand, depending on this very principle or this very amendment, there are several companies, web companies, etc., which provide an immunity cloak, which provide a protective cloak on even the perpetrators when the victims try to find out who has created some offensive post. Because even the web companies also, they would enter into a kind of agreement for providing privacy, providing confidentially to each and every user, and thereby whether that particular user is a criminal or whether that particular user is a victim, if this person has committed some criminal activities, they would not divulge any private information about, including even the names, the location data, etc., to any individual victim. And here, as you get to see, only upon probable cause that has been presented by the police or by the courts, etc., they would also abide by US laws, and then only they would decide whether the same has to be divulged or not. Now, we will discuss about the speech-related challenges on the cyberspace. The first thing that we are going to discuss is about terrorism, including cyber terrorism. There are lots of debates, discussions, etc., and even research going on how cyber terrorism is being created, how this is being spread, etc. But at the bottom line of this, we find gross abuse and misuse of freedom of speech and expression. Cyberterrorism may include spreading hatred on the internet, recording and showing extremely violent contents to spread threats, using online platforms to run terror organization funded parallel governments, recruiting youth and children, etc. Next, we get to see another speech related challenge, that is obscenity, non consensual pornography, revenge porn, etc., which form part of sexually explicit contents or obscene contents on the cyberspace. These are also created by grossly misusing freedom of speech and expression. This can be done by posting derogatory, sexually explicit remarks, uploading photographs, violating privacy, etc. Next, we get to see another challenge which is considered as the worst type of challenge, that is online child trafficking, online child sexual abuse. This is maximum done by sharing information and images of children on web platforms illegally, using children for pornographic purposes, alluring them to share sexted contents, sextortion, etc. In all these things, that means where the child is targeted, the child is victimized, we do get to see that very improper use of speech and expression basically are done for grooming the children and also for targeting the children, for trapping the children, for such kinds of offenses. Next, speech related challenges also includes creation of hate speech, which can be against race, which can be against any specific community, any specific linguistical group, etc. Misogynist speech targeting gender, online seditious speech, cyberbullying, trolling, etc. Next, speech-related challenges may also include defamatory, intimidating, threatening speech. Very importantly, the last point, that is defamatory, intimidating or threatening speech, basically can be found or actually shadows all the other types of speech related challenges. So, what is the guiding law for internet speech, and how has it basically created a challenge for regulation of internet and contents on internet and cyberspace? Because the growth and development of internet and cyberspace may have been largely influenced by the USA, we cannot ignore the fact that web companies making the basic structure of internet are created on the basis of US laws. These laws flow from First Amendment guarantee of the US Constitution, which has broadened the concept of free speech on internet. So what does First Amendment guarantee say? It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, we will see that how the First Amendment guarantee has basically helped to shape the speech related rights on the internet. So the first thing that we do notice, I'm going to discuss about certain case laws from 1960s to 1970s, and I'm going to explain this. The first thing that we are going to see is First Amendment protects the right to receive and possess information irrespective of its origin. There are cases like Stanley versus Georgia. This is 1969 case where the Supreme Court overturned Georgia law for criminalizing possessing pornographic films. And thereafter, we have got to see that internet or even certain web companies have been given license to produce or to host pornographic films, however, or pornographic contents. However, there are certain laws which actually mandate that these pornographic contents must be legal pornographic contents. But it has also impacted on the people's right to view, access pornographic contents which are basically legal. That means these pornographic contents must have been created with the consent of the actors, and these pornographic contents must not have been created by infringing the privacy of others. Again, we do get to see another aspect, that is, speech that may be considered as indecent is also protected by the First Amendment guarantee. Here, we would see that the government may not regulate such speech unless it is obscene, a narrow legal category that includes only speech that appeals to a prurient interest in sex or depict certain sexual conduct in a patently offensive way, each as defined by local norms and lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. This statement was basically given in a very landmark judgment in Miller versus California. This is a 1973 case. Basically, from here, we do understand or we do get to see that how the concept of indecent speech is basically changes from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, but the web companies or for example the internet or for example the cyberspace or web page etc, they may not be held responsible for hosting such kind of speech because in the US that particular speech may not be considered as indecent. This has really thrown a huge challenge on the law enforcement agencies, especially in other countries, including some South Asian countries, where moral wrongs have basically dominated over these kinds of speech related contents. Next, we would also get to see the case of Bantam Book Inc. versus Sullivan. This is a 1963 case where it was seen that the First Amendment protects against the government efforts to impose prior restraints on publications. It was observed in this case that government cannot enjoin particular publications that it finds objectionable without a prior judicial determination that such publications may lawfully be banned. Even though this is a 1963 case, we do get to see the impact of this even today also. That means if any seditious content or if any indecent content or if any other content that carries some kind of expression, speech, etc., that tries to criticize the government or any political persona, that may not be banned priorly by the government. And this has been also followed to a certain extent in countries other than the US. For example, in India also we have seen several examples of this. UK also we have seen several examples of this, etc. And the last case that I'm going to discuss here, or I'm going to take up here, is New York Times versus Sullivan. This is 1964 case, where it was observed that the First Amendment protects false speech and speech criticizing public figures. It was also observed that we have a profound national commitment to the principle that debate on public issues should be uninhibited, robust, and wide open, and that means it may well include vehement, causist, and sometimes unpleasantly sharp attacks on government and public officials. As we do get to understand that these kinds of judgments basically had created a wide platform whereby these kinds of judgments have basically encouraged people to come up with their freedom of speech, expression, etc., to share it on the internet for better democratic government, or even for making the speech on the cyberspace even more stronger right. However, it completely depends upon country to country as how these kinds of speech related contents are being regulated. As such, we do understand that this also creates a huge challenge, especially when a particular speech in a country is considered as absolutely legal, but that may not be considered as legal in other country, and that speech has been created in the former country. That means where the speech is completely legal, but it has basically affected, or it has basically been received in another country where such speech is not considered as legal. In such cases, extradition or even, for example, prosecution, etc., becomes a huge challenge. Well, these are some of the challenges that we definitely face on internet, and also the government, the policymakers also face these challenges while developing some policies, some laws, etc. What are the suggestions? What are the conclusions? How we can deal with these challenges? From my side, I have got 3 points to offer here. Number one, international treaties for cooperating policing on cyberspace must be made. And if these treaties are made, then it is for the states to join these treaties and also to ratify these treaties for their own good. That means once these treaties are made universally acceptable, then in such cases the countries can come up, can collaborate with each other, and can see that criminalities on the cyberspace or the challenges on the cyberspace, they can be dealt in a holistic fashion, in a united way. Next is recognition of offences by international stakeholders and domestic laws. There are several offences on the cyberspace or committed on the cyberspace which are not yet recognized by several domestic laws and also by international stakeholders. For example, revenge porn, that has not yet been recognized by several countries, including India, or for example, several other Asian, South Asian countries, African countries, or even, for example, European Union countries. Or for example, there are other kinds of content related offenses, content related problems are also coming up, and one of them is also can be one of them can be considered, and this thing is basically related to deep fake porns. Even though we have got some umbrella laws, for example, laws for sexually explicit contents, etc., laws for obscenity, etc., on the cyberspace, but in my opinion, such kinds of offenses, such kinds of behavior, such kinds of expression, speech, contents, etc., must be critically examined, and the countries, the states, and also the international stakeholders must come together to create holistic policies and also laws, especially I'm talking about the states, the countries concerned, to prevent or to also prohibit misuse of internet cyberspace and also free speech, or for example expression, etc. And last but not the least, proper policy for managing the cases and extradition of the offenders is very, very important in these cases. Obviously, this includes proper training for the police officers, proper training for the court officers, the prosecutors, the judges, etc. And also, more awareness is needed in in general, so that whenever any sort of challenges that we just had a discussion about, or any sort of offenses that any victim or any other person comes to know about, they can take these matters to the police, to the proper reporting authorities, and it can be reported and it can be taken care of. Thank you.